All right, I have heard more hype around the Nike Invincible Run 3 this year than almost any other shoe I've looked at, so let's see if they're worth any of it. Here we go. Now the uppers of the Invincible Run 3 are an entire bed of Nike Flyknit. Now Nike says that this is to add stability where you need it, also a light feel, but also more breathability. Now when I put these on the breathability test, it was pretty interesting. These things heated up 161.7 degrees, it cooled down 72.9 degrees. However, that is significantly more warming than you get from shoes like the Adidas Prime X Strung, or just shoes that have much more minimal uppers. Now, because these are a little bit more secure than those shoes, you do get a little bit more in the way of security. If you look on the lateral and medial sides, you almost get this little Nike flight wire-esque material going through here. It's that serpentine textile weave that connects the midfoot and almost rear foot all the way up to the forefoot. And that does give it a little bit more side-to-side stability and just overall more containment in the uppers. But the other thing I found a little bit more Jekyll and Hyde was the tongue. Now the tongue, I think, is what is trapping a lot of the heat because it is a little bit thicker. It's a little more like that terry cloth jersey material in there. And so it does kind of bulk up the uppers a little bit more, even though if you look here in the heel counter, they actually intentionally made the heel counter a lot smaller and tried to make it more enveloping around the back of your heel to reduce heel slippage, but also reduce weight. But what I noticed about the heel counter, especially for certain foot types, which we'll get to in the fit section, is you kind of got to use the runner's knot back eyelet and forward eyelet a little bit differently for different runners. So we'll get to that when we get to the fit section. But I do like the low profile nature of it, but you do kind of have to know your foot type to really get the most comfort as well as most runability out of these shoes. And looking at this Flyknit on the upper durability test, the Dremel 10-second Tire Grit sandpaper, I mean, the sandpaper was almost just like grabbing and digging in more and more as I was doing this. It does start to break right through the first layer of the Flyknit. However, it does not get through the underside, which is kind of a miracle for how it looks. However, I would say if you are trail running on these, I think any bit of abrasive brush will start to wear these down, so just watch out for that. And so for containment on the universal rating system, I'm gonna give them a 3.5 out of 5. They do get up into the elite territory in terms of containment, feeling like a glove around your foot. Just gotta be the right foot type and kind of have the right setup for it. But getting into midsole teardown, this is where I was most curious to see what was underneath of all this ZoomX foam, and the answer is more ZoomX foam. There is no shank on these. These are completely held up by the stack of ZoomX foam because there's just so much in there. Now, if you notice, this is one of these shoes that has a lower heel than it does an arch. Now, Nike calls this a rocker. However, what it is just more of a molded arch because the inferior side of the shoe is just a standard running shoe. Now, what I noticed on this is it does put you in a little bit more of a forward tilt when you put them on when you're walking or running. Like when a running coach shows you how to run, you know, they say you should be like tilting forward. That's the feeling you should get. That's kind of what these shoes do. They put your midfoot and forefoot kind of leaning forward, take a lot of the pressure off your heel. We'll talk about the good and bad of that when we talk about the runability section. Looking at this massive stack of ZoomX foam on the jump height test, 22.5 centimeters of jump height on these. That beats the Prime X Strung, Vaporflies, and Alpha Flies. With these, I just really think the geometry of the midsole, as well as how flowable ZoomX foam is, it's just very easy to get off the ground on these. Now, is it gonna last as long as other shoes? Probably not, because it doesn't have the shank. However, for initial quality, initial push off, initial launch, these are just as good as anything else out there. And comparing that with the bounce height test, I got 32.5 centimeters in the heel and 39.5 centimeters in the forefoot. Once again, one of the best shoes I've done. Now remember that the bounce height test does reward a shoe with a lot more springy foam because sometimes if it gets close to the shank, the ball will just kind of die on that shank. And so with this one, there is none. So it's just all elastic foam that's allowing it to pop up. So, you know, you see what you can do with just a full bed of ZoomX foam. The shoe does move really well, and just having an entire bed of that ZoomX foam, allowing it to kind of work independently, really does kind of bring out the best properties of it. It's just if you're a heavier runner, just kind of watch out for the bottoming of that over time. And so for bounce and shock absorption on the universal rating system, giving them a 5 out of 5 for bounce, obviously. Shock absorption a 4 out of 5, just because it really could be improved with a shank. And looking at the outsole tread of the Invincible Run 3, no pun intended, but it is just a huge footprint of outsole tread. It is almost kind of like this waving rectangular pattern that goes all the way from the heel to the forefoot, and it does kind of mimic a runner's gait, kind of going from lateral into medial for push off. Now, what I do like about this is that it is a little bit flatter, so it's easier to get from step to step. However, you do get a little bit more of a variable tread depth here to increase the grip. The one thing I would watch out for if you are going on trails with these, I mean, I wouldn't be putting these on really rough rough, rugged terrain. However, if you're on a shale or, a packed dirt type trail, you are gonna start to get dirt in between the exposed foam as well as the outsole tread. I even noticed with mine, I actually started wedging some of this under there. I almost started coming up in one spot because I was doing a little more trail running on these than I normally do. So I would say the trail has to be very finely packed. You gotta at least brush it off every time you use them or just stick to the road. But looking at the threes, speed ratio came in at 2.85. The weight of them really kind of takes that speed ratio down, and I think that is more of a product of how wide, how bulbous that midsole is, how the uppers just kind of sit almost in a hovercraft of ZoomX foam. So it does increase the weight of the shoe a little bit and takes down that speed ratio versus some other more elite speed focused or super shoe type shoes. And on the outsole durability test, the Dremel 10-second tie grit sandpaper, not even a millimeter of damage. Now it's only a millimeter on the tread depth on these. It is a 4mm rubber thickness, but that does mean that you're bottoming out into the ZoomX foam. However, in terms of durability to the right runner, which we'll talk about in a second, these can be very durable. However, to other runners, maybe not. And so for durability on the universal rating system, 2.5 out of 5. I am really concerned about the ZoomX foam bottoming out, especially for certain runners. As well, if you do have any bit of a shuffling type gait on these, you're gonna start to wear these down, which we'll talk about might be a little bit more people than you would think on these in the runnability section. But getting into the fit, honestly, from first use to about 5th or 6th use, it's a completely different shoe. Now, I did like how forgiving these were in the forefoot. I found these broke in pretty easily after about 1.5 runs or 1.5 just outings in them. So I'd say narrow, medium, and wide foot can go true to size. You're a 40, I would go up 1/2 size in these. I wouldn't go up any more because you'll start slipping out of the heel counter. One thing I do really like these for is heel pain. They offload the heel very nice. And in the forefoot, because they are a little bit more forgiving up there because of that ZoomX foam in there, that is really nice. If you're somebody with really painful overpronation flat foot, these may not be the best things for you because it's really hard to fit an orthotic in them with how low the heel counter is. Now you can augment that by using the back lace eyelet in a traditional runner's knot. That'll lock you in here with a low profile orthotic. However, I found in terms of comfort as well as performance, what I found best was using the back lace eyelet with just skipping the forward lace eyelet, not doing a runner's knot. I found that without an orthotic, that gave me no heel slippage as well as ultimate comfort in the uppers. I didn't feel like the laces were digging in or I was getting any numbness on my foot or anything like that. So I think with an orthotic, it's gotta be a runner's knot and a very low profile orthotic at that. And for just regular comfort, regular running, I think back eyelet, skip the forward one. And so for comfort on the universal rating system, I was gonna take off some points just because of the initial issues. However, once you break them in just a little bit, they're an easy 5 out of 5. But getting into the all-important gait analysis and runnability of the Invincible Run 3, I found that these fit best with a slightly posterior midfoot gait. I just found that these are the most forgiving for that type of strike pattern. They're the most fluid for that type of strike pattern. I also found that these are fantastic for a true heel striker. These provide so much stability in the rear foot because, like I said, these shoes just almost provide like a bubble around you or a hovercraft-like effect around you. So they're really stable, plus they transition from that heel strike to midfoot to forefoot. When you're rolling through your stance phase of gait into propulsion, they do that easily better than any other shoe I've tested. Now, what I have noticed is if you are a forefoot striker, number one, they almost shuffle a little bit because the forefoot is so wide. These have a flange the same as a tennis or basketball shoe would. So when you're coming down the lateral side of the foot, it just kind of catches that little ridge there and it almost kind of shuffles your gait. So when I was forefoot striking on these, I could almost hear it, almost like sweeping when I was running. And typically my forefoot gait is a little bit harder, a little bit more slappy, right? So I don't shuffle at all. I'm just down and up, down and up. Whereas on these, I really could feel the shuffling. And I also did notice if you are a slightly anterior midfoot striker, so kind of in that distal metatarsal area, these things are one of the loudest shoes I've ever put on. They just sound like you're in clown shoes. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, the performance is great. It's just get ready for some sound effects with that. So I would say if you're a forefoot striker, you got to get used to the shoe. You really have to know how to strike forefoot in these to kind of get the best out of them. And of course, love to know your thoughts on the Invincible Run 3, kind of what's been your experience. You looking to try these or going somewhere else in the Nike running lineup or somewhere else in general. And if you want to see the Adidas Prime X Strung go under the knife, another shoe with just an incredible amount of foam in it, make sure you click in this video up above. And if you want to see how to keep your feet cool in shoes like these that may hold on to heat a little bit more, make sure you click into this video up above. And of course, subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you in the next one.